Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Mini Books Podcast with your host Gloria and Rogan, and today we are excited to dive into Special Book with you. We picked this one because it has really important lessons to share and we can't wait to talk about them. So let's get started.
All right, buckle up, history buffs. We're diving into the enigma that is Napoleon Bonaparte.
Napoleon, he's the ultimate embodiment of contradictions.
Right. I mean, the guy crowned himself emperor, but still claimed to be all about the French Revolution's ideals.
Yeah.
Talk about walking a tightrope. And that's exactly what we're unpacking today, using Frank McLenn's incredible biography of Napoleon.
Yeah, McLennan doesn't hold back. This isn't some simplified hero or villain tale. He digs deep into the contradictions that weren't just actions, they were like fundamental to who Napoleon was.
Totally. And he argues that these contradictions are key to understanding his whole story, the rise, the reign, the pretty spectacular crash and burn.
It's all there, and it starts early on. McLennan paints this vivid picture of young Napoleon at Brienne Military School.
Oh yeah, strutting around that fancy getup.
Right. Blue coat, red collar, all the bells and whistles, literally. It's almost funny when you think about the whole austere emperor image he cultivates later.
So true. But this kind of gets at that early duality, right? I mean, he's at this elite military academy.
Because of his family's claims of nobility.
Right, which got him in the door, but
he never really fit in. He was constantly reminded that he was an outsider.
because he was Corsican.
Exactly. Corsican accent, Corsican pride, it all set him apart, even got teased mercilessly for it. And that's where we bump into one of the biggest contradictions of Napoleon's life. His Corsican patriotism battling it out with his French ambition.
And McLennan tells that amazing story about a French officer having to, pull Napoleon aside and tell him to chill out with the whole Corsica forever routine.
He was a King's Cadet after all.
Right. Talk about pressure. And to really get this, you have to understand the whole Corsica France situation. It was messy. Really messy.
Corsica had its own thing going on, trying to break free from France, and then the French Revolution throws everything into chaos. And there's Napoleon, stuck right in the middle.
Torn between two worlds.
Exactly, and it gets even juicier. Remember how much he idolized Paoli?
The Corsican revolutionary leader?
Yeah. Napoleon worshipped the ground, Paoli walked on, but, and this is a big but,
He totally throws him under the bus later on.
as his own power grows, ruthless, calculated. It makes you wonder, was it always about ambition for Napoleon?
You have to wonder, was he always willing to choose power over principle? It's a question that follows him everywhere.
Yeah.
In war, in politics, even in his personal life.
And here's where it gets really interesting. McLennan talks about Napoleon's cynicism, his belief that people are basically driven by self-interest. Not exactly an optimist, our Napoleon.
So not exactly buying into the whole revolutionary ideals thing, even when he's supposedly championing them.
It makes you think, doesn't it? It really does. And it shows in how he approached, well, pretty much everything. I mean, you can't deny his military genius. The guy was a strategic wizard on the battlefield. But that cynicism about human nature, it went hand in hand with a certain ruthlessness.
You mean the ends justify the means kind of thing?
Exactly. And you see this play out over and over again. McLennan really gets into the sheer scale of Napoleon's ambition, this drive to conquer, But it often came with a shocking disregard for the human cost.
And that's where something like the Russian campaign comes in.
Oh, absolutely. McLennan doesn't try to downplay how horrific that was. The Grand Army marching into this vast, unforgiving land, totally unprepared for the logistics, the weather, the brutality of it all.
Yeah, I remember reading that. It's like he just couldn't compute the idea of defeat, even with people warning him.
He'd built up this image of being invincible, a force of nature, unstoppable. And it worked for a while, until it didn't.
So the Russian campaign really showed how flawed that whole persona was. His cynicism didn't apply to himself, right?
Yeah, it's almost like he couldn't see his own blind spots. Which actually brings us to a whole other side of Napoleon. Sorry to interrupt you guys. If you're enjoying this podcast, then don't forget to check out our official YouTube channel, Mini Books Podcast, and subscribe for more great podcasts like this one. His personal relationships, especially with women.
Because it's one thing to be ruthless on the battlefield, but in your personal life, that's got to be different. And we have to talk about Josephine. Passionate, tumultuous, full of infidelity. It's a lot.
It really is. And McLennan gets into all of it. The genuine affection they had, but also the insecurities, the power dynamics. It's fascinating.
But on the one hand, Napoleon clearly adored her, confided in her. And then he'd say things about women in general that just made my jaw drop.
Yeah, like that quote McClin includes, where Napoleon basically says women are just baby-making machines. Yikes, right.
Seriously. It's it's so contradictory to how he felt about Josephine. So what do we make of that? Was he just a product of his time, or did he actually believe those things?
That is the question. And what McClin argues is that it's not either or, it's both. Yeah, he was influenced by the social norms back then, of course, but he could also go against those norms whenever it was convenient.
Like when you put his own brothers in positions of power.
Exactly. Nepotism at its finest. He was all about meritocracy, except when he wasn't. And that's what's so fascinating, this back and forth between progressive ideals and totally pragmatic, or you could even say self-serving actions.
He was trying to exist in 2 centuries at once, almost.
Yeah, and maybe by trying to do that, he ended up embodying both sides, which is why I think he's still so fascinating today, right?
Absolutely. It's like McClin says Napoleon was a product of his time, but also a disruptor of norms. You
Yeah.
see it again and again.
Totally. Champion of Enlightenment ideals, but ruling with an iron fist.
Mm.
Military genius, undone by his own ego? It's wild.
And that's where his exile to St. Helena is so powerful.
Yeah.
The way McClin describes it, it's heartbreaking.
Okay.
This man who once controlled most of Europe, stuck on this remote island.
The prisoner of his own ambition.
Exactly. It's almost Shakespearean, you know?
Yeah.
The tragedy of it all. And yet, even in exile, he's still trying to control the narrative, dictating his memoirs, building the legend of Napoleon.
He knew image mattered. Legacy. He wanted to be remembered a certain way.
And in a way, he won. He's still captivating us centuries later. I mean, here we are talking about him.
It makes you think about legacy, right? What will people remember about us? And what are we willing to do to make sure they remember it that way?
Big questions. But
Yeah.
that's what makes this stuff so fascinating. So as we wrap up this deep dive on Napoleon, what's the key takeaway for you? What can we learn from this incredibly complex figure?
I think it's a reminder that history isn't black and white. It's messy, it's full of contradictions. And the more we embrace that, the more we learn, not just about the past, but about ourselves too.
Because who hasn't struggled with their own contradictions, right? Exactly. Well, on that note, a huge thanks to you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll leave you with this. Napoleon's story is a powerful reminder that we're all full of contradictions, and it's in those contradictions that we often find our greatest strengths and our most human flaws. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this conversation and want to dive into more book insights and key learnings, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Mini Books Podcast, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. We're back every Sunday at 9 a.m. with new books and more to learn from. Until next time, take care, keep learning, and keep growing. Remember, this is Mini Books Podcast.